and welcome to my channel. For the first time after years of being asked, I am finally going to talk publicly about one of the world's most notorious serial killers, John Wayne Gacy. This series of videos will feature my memories and interactions with him, his family, and several of his victims. My nightmares primarily stem from the apartment building where my grandmother lived at 6114 West Miami Avenue, in Chicago, Illinois. Marion Gacy, John's mother, also lived in this building for some time as well. This is only the beginning of my experiences. Please keep watching to learn about it all and so much more. I also have nightmares about what might possibly be buried at the Miami Avenue apartment building. John was the maintenance person for the apartment building, and several strange things occurred during that time frame. At the time, there were no real concerns, just curiosity. Questions like why we would go to bed one night with a gravel parking lot and wake up the following morning to discover the parking lot had been paved. Why were trenches dug and landscaping done at 2 a.m.? Why, when there was a plumbing problem, did the laundry area have new concrete poured in and then we were asked to stay away for a few days to let it set, but we're still having plumbing issues? These types of things were all done in the middle of the night. When asked, John's answer was always that it was the only time he could do it since he was busy doing the jobs that paid during the day, and he wasn't going to use any help because it would cost him too much in payroll. I am not ashamed to say that I was spoiled by my grandma. I was the youngest of her 19 grandchildren with roughly 20 years age difference between her first one and me, and about a 4-year gap between me and the next one, who was of course a boy. In actuality, there were 4 of us who were girls and the rest boys. The girls were much older than me, and most times the boys didn't want me hanging around and would either ditch me or pick on me until I left them alone. My grandma always took care of me and would play games and entertain me so I wouldn't be upset. As I grew a bit older, I stopped being so easy to be pushed away from my cousins, and not only did that allow me to grow closer to them, it also taught me how to play sports, become friends with some of their friends, and it also showed me what being protected meant. But this was all during family gatherings, which were often, but not always. At home, it was just me and my brother, who was 5 years older than me and always busy with school, sports, and his friends. My parents both worked full-time, so I decided to keep going to my grandma's when we had school breaks or vacations and for summers. I would spend weeks at a time there, and I laugh now about it all now, but back then my parents would actually come there to visit me instead of making me come home. I loved being there. I loved being with her. I had many friends in her area and was always able to find something to do, and as I grew older, my grandma would let me do things I know full well my parents wouldn't have, like go wherever I wanted, as long as I was home by the time the street lights were on, without her having to know exactly where I was. She allowed me to take buses to places like Axel Roller Rink as long as I had others with me, and go to Tasty Hasty, places no longer around. The downside of all the time I spent at my grandma's is the fact that I met Gacy. I met his mom. I met his sisters. I met Carol, his second wife, and her 2 daughters. I met several of his victims. I met several of his friends. I met several of his employees. He used to take me, his mom, and my grandma shopping and out to dinner. 2 of my brother's friends from the area ended up in his crawl space. I had been in his house. I had been in his car. I had been to a party. I had been to his barbecue not knowing there was a body underneath. I met several other employees who fell victim to him. That man even babysat me a few times, for lack of better words, so I wasn't alone in the building while his mom and my grandma would go play bingo. But I will say this: that man never touched my brother or any other family member ever. Thank goodness. News outlets at the time reported that retired Chicago police officer Bill Dorsch stated he had reason to believe there might be more victims buried in the grounds of an apartment building on West Miami Avenue in Chicago, where Gacy had been the caretaker for several years. In 1975, Dorsch, then a Chicago police officer, observed Gacy, whom he knew on a casual basis, holding a shovel in the early morning. When Dorsch confronted him, Gacy said he was doing work that he was too busy to do during the day. Dorsch also said that several other residents of West Miami Avenue stated they had seen Gacy digging trenches at the property in the early to mid-1970s. At that time, Gacy was still married to Carol Hoff. In March 2012, Cook County Sheriff's officials submitted a request to excavate the grounds of this property. The Cook County State's attorney denied the request, citing a lack of probable cause, including the results of a 1998 search of the property. However, the sheriff's office noted that in 1998, a radar survey suggested 14 areas of interest within the grounds, yet only 2 of these had been excavated. 4 of those remaining were described as being staggeringly suggestive of human skeletons. This is the same exact building. I went there in June 2024 to take this to show you the building, the parking lot and the back area, still the same. This is Gacy as Pogo the Clown at a few events. These are photos of Gacy and Carol and a few with his mom from his wedding. Several family members were there. I was not. Even Carol said later she could never figure out why he married her. He didn't really have any interest or desire in her or what married couples should be doing. His mother, Marion, was such a kind and loving lady. She was also dealing with a lot of health issues. Her husband had passed away a few years earlier, so when John was paroled to Illinois, he moved in with her. This is from Maryhill Cemetery, where both John Sr. and Marion Gacy are buried. Some of Gacy's victims are buried here as well, but I will go into more detail in future videos. And here is the infamous house with the grass showing 76 for the bicentennial party he had at his home for the celebration. Me, my grandma, and a few other family members, friends, and even 2 future victims attended. Little did I know what was underneath. Several of his business cards he gave out to as many people as possible, including my grandma and my parents and several relatives. These are a few photos from a couple of parties he had. This photo in particular still haunts me to this day and makes me sick. This was from a barbecue he had at his home to show off the new barbecue pit he made in his yard. Me, my grandma, a friend of my grandma's, another relative of mine, and his own mother attended. Little did any of us know that he had built that barbecue pit to cover up a body he buried underneath it. Much of the food shown in this photo was cooked on top of that grill. I myself, many years later, heard his mom say that was one of the most disturbing things her son did. It was bad enough that he did all those things to all those young men, but to then boast about something he built over one of them, and then had people over to eat what he cooked was like rubbing it in everyone's faces and making us all suffer even more from what he did. That was one thing she never forgave him for. Hard to believe he could look at his wife like that, or any woman, and it all be fake. This was one very good example that everyone believed he loved her. Looking back, a very good look at how deceitful he was right before your eyes, and you had no idea. Several different photos of him dressing as Pogo the Clown to entertain kids at parades, hospitals, parties, and holidays. He also was the clown mascot for Bressler's 33 flavors of ice cream and did appearances for them as well as commercials. Kind of sick that he ended up with 33 victims as well. Here are some pictures and videos about just some of the victims. A few I knew very well, including going to Axel roller rink with one in particular, several different times. A few I knew casually and a couple that I saw around but had no interaction with besides maybe a hi. And many I didn't know, had never seen or even heard of until this case. I am not going to touch on too much about the victims just yet. The next video I put out will most likely be all about them since so many of their stories were overshadowed by this monster's acts, and people should, at the very least, hear about the lives they lived, the people they were, and not just their ending and how they were ended. I think these pictures say enough for now, but I promise, their stories are coming soon. Here are photos of many more victims. Again, much more to come about them all. Please keep an eye out for Gacy's victims, more than just a number. I hope to put that up very soon. Ken Parker and Mike Marino were best friends who went missing together, and sadly were found buried in Gacy's crawl space in the same shallow grave. Mike's mom always insisted that the body pulled from there was not her son because the items of clothes she said did not match the last clothes she knew he wore. In 2016, she had him exhumed and DNA did come back as not his DNA, although the coroner's office has said they accidentally mislabeled the bones, and the bones identified were that of his best friend who he was buried alongside of, Ken Parker. The bodies had started to fuse together, so I understand why the mother does not want to believe it is her son. I believe it is, and so does the coroner. As anyone who knows this case knows that his last victim was Rob Peast, a 15-year-old high school boy who was working at Nissan Pharmacy in Des Plaines, Illinois. As I have stated before, I am not going to get into too many details about the victims. That will be the next video, but I do want to point out a few small things about this one right now. As sad as it is that this young man had to lose his life, his disappearance finally brought an end to the reign of terror Gacy was behind. Immediate notification to police. Many people saw and had some interaction with Gacy at this location. Absolutely no doubt in anyone's minds that he did not run away or decide to go somewhere else other than what he went outside to his mom and told her. It was his mother's birthday and he couldn't wait to get off work and celebrate with her. He told his mom he would be back in about 15 minutes, that he wanted to talk to a guy about a different job that was paying much more than what he was making. What teenager doesn't want money? Especially at that age. He had lent his jacket to the cashier since it was freezing outside, and being up front, it was always chilly with the doors opening and closing. After talking to his mom and running back in, he asked her for his jacket so he could run out back and try and catch the contractor before he left. In the haste of it all, she forgot to remove a photo developing receipt she had put in there when she sent off a roll of film to develop through there. Peast flew out the back door after Gacy and was never seen alive again. More coming up about all this in a little bit. Just a scary thing I want to point out. When I set out to do this, I not only wanted to tell you the story, but I also wanted to show you the story, both then and now as best as I could. With doing that, we went to several of the places and took photos and videos. One very scary thing is that Nissan Pharmacy, which is no longer there, was only 3.5 miles away from Gacy's home. 9 minutes away in today's traffic. About 6 minutes back then. That's how secure Gacy felt about not getting caught by this time. Thankfully, he was very wrong. Gacy has admitted to dumping bodies into the river, including Rob's body and 3 others that were confirmed, yet Gacy stated that 4 others were in there, even making the comment that one body that he threw over the bridge landed on a passing barge. What many may not know is that Gacy did have survivors. Back in 1971, when Gacy was paroled here from Iowa after serving time for sodomy on 2 teen boys, things were not as they are these days with everyone knowing everything. He was arrested and charged 2 different times in 1972 for assault on 2 different teenage boys, and at least one more made a report. The police stations taking the reports had no idea about any of Gacy's past, and his parole officer in Chicago had no idea about the arrests. This is why so many believe he started ending them instead of letting them go. There was also another survivor named Jeff Rignall who in 1978 was walking in Rosemont towards a bar and was lured over to Gacy's car with the intention of smoking some weed. Once he was in the car, Gacy quickly covered his mouth with a rag full of chloroform. When he woke up, he was in Gacy's house restrained in a torture chamber. Gacy repeatedly brutally assaulted him with various adult objects, including himself, until he would pass out again. Then Gacy would wait till he regained consciousness and would do it all over again. Finally, Jeff woke up and was no longer at Gacy's house. He was by a statue in Lincoln Park. Because Gacy's crawl space was full. Gacy seemed to focus on certain areas in the first several years of his finding of victims. Places like the Greyhound bus station in downtown Chicago, the Aragon Ballroom where many concerts and events were held at and that many teens and young people would hang out at, the L train stations, especially the ones away from busy areas. He would also frequent an area known as Boys Town by Wrigleyville where many gay men would live and socialize at. This is also where many gay bars were located back then. Back then, the city of Chicago would print up a map of the bars that gays were welcome at to try and help stop the violence that was bestowed upon them by others who didn't accept nor understand that type of lifestyle. In fact, to this day, that area is still referred to as Boys Town, and it is where the heart of Chicago pride started and continues to this day. But back then it was a much smaller area, and word spread amongst each other to be careful of a man in a caddy with a spotlight pretending to be a cop, which explains another way to lure his victims. He would also go to a much closer location to where he lived called Jefferson Park. This was considered the hub in the northwest suburbs, as the Metro train would meet there with the CTA train, Chicago Transit Authority, or better known as the L, as well as the Northwest suburban buses. I would actually take the Metro into Jefferson Park, and then get on the 56A bus, which would stop right at the corner of Milwaukee Avenue and Miami Avenue, and my grandma would either meet me at that corner, or would watch me walk over from her window, since it was about 100 yards or so to the building. What many may not remember or had even realized was that Gacy was not arrested for Peace's disappearance originally. Although the family immediately reported his disappearance to the Des Plaines Police Department, and they took the report seriously and sent officers to Gacy's house to talk to him about it. Although Gacy took a while to answer the door, claiming to be in the back of his house on the phone, which was not true, and did not hear them at the front, he finally did answer the back door and let them in. Granted, about 20 minutes had gone by since they first arrived. They said he seemed calm and let them in and offered them coffee. He talked for a bit and told them his lies. One officer even asked to use the bathroom in hopes of looking around a little better, which Gacy allowed him to do, although he did walk him towards the hallway to the bathroom and was standing there talking to the other officer while the one was in the bathroom. That officer did notice an unusual smell when the furnace came on, but was unable to put a finger on what it was exactly. With neither officer seeing anything unusual and not finding Peace there or anything linked to him at that moment, they had no choice but to leave. That officer stated many times after that evening that he wishes he never had left. It haunts him because Peace was believed to be still alive but unconscious and bound in the attic, which is why Gacy didn't answer the door for over 20 minutes. Not long after the officers left, Gacy took Peace down, finished him off and loaded him in his trunk, and then left to dispose of him under the I-55 bridge into the river, getting stuck in the mud and snow, and had to get a tow out of there, which is why he didn't show up when he said he would for his interview. Although they did not find him at that time, this did bring him front and center, and they wanted him to come in and talk, and Gacy said he would but didn't show up at the time set up. In fact, he showed up around 2 a.m. and had mud all over him. He was told to come back the next day and never did. The police started to follow him everywhere he went, and Gacy did all he could to make a joke out of it, telling people they were his security. At establishments, he would send drinks or food over to them, trying to look like a big shot to whoever he was with. Leaving places if he left at the same time as anyone else, he would make it a point to walk over to the unmarked car and talk to them, and then he would leave and drive like a complete jerk. The walls were closing in on Gacy. He went to his lawyer's office, and after being in there for hours, he left. The lawyer came out and said, "Whatever you do, don't let that man out of your sight." As he drove recklessly throughout the suburbs at high rates of speed and cutting in and out of traffic while on an expressway, when he pulled off to get gas, the detectives saw him put something into the gas attendant's pocket, so they asked what it was. The kid, who had no idea what was going on, reached into his pocket and pulled out a joint. The detectives had enough. They pulled him over and arrested him for driving reckless, speeding, and drugs. Gacy was never a free man from that point on. What you just saw were some photos from the area back then. I am now going to go back to the Peace case and get into what turned out to be the beginning of the end for Gacy. One thing I did love to have seen was the photos of him being held on a psychiatric hold once he got to Cook County Jail, because they kept him restrained to the bed with both hands and feet bound. I wish I knew it at the time, because I would have loved to have asked him how he liked it, although I am sure I would never have made it in to see him, as well as it being so early on in the discovery. Neither I nor the world had any clue what was about to greet them that Christmas. These next photos are from the very start of the search warrant of Gacy's house. These will lead into the inside of his home, with photos showing you the different rooms inside. It will also show you the beginning of the gruesome discovery of the crawlspace. I also would like to take a moment and point out that as this video proceeds, we will be getting into some graphic details as well as graphic photos of what they found in that crawlspace, so please beware. Some photos that will be displayed in a bit are chilling. These are photos showing them bringing out the bodies. All this searching, digging, excavating, bagging remains, loading the coroner's van, started in December and continued for months. They missed holidays like Christmas and New Year's. They had to leave doors open for ventilation since it was raunchy as soon as they started with the first body. Can you imagine that smell of decay? But they were also doing this in the coldest time of the year, and there was also a blizzard that hit in 1979. That slowed them down some, but it did not stop them. As the constant barrage of people finally started to slow down due to the cold, me and my grandma and a few others would go by there from time to time and bring them coffee and donuts if it was early, or coffee and sandwiches if it was later. All this out of her pocket, and refused anyone who tried to pay her anything for it. And yes, my grandma knew enough people that we were allowed to stop there. We never tried to get in their way, nor did we ever ask to see anything, although we were showed some things as long as we touched nothing. I never wanted to look. But I do remember one time we stopped. They had already dug up most of the floor that was above the crawl space, so I couldn't help but see. We went back at least once more, but I stayed in the car. As I stated a few minutes ago, I will be getting into some graphic images, and that will be starting next. If you wish to not see these images, please feel free to fast forward a few minutes. I will put in the description below the timestamps of this part from the first image to the last. Seeing these photos continues to haunt me because not only have I seen these photos way too many times, I also have seen the real place these were taken at. I also knew some of the victims. I also know in way too much detail what happened to so many of these bodies before they ended up like this. The torture these victims had to endure is horrible. More to come on that later. But to endure that and then to just be disposed of like they were nothing and nobody cared about them is heartbreaking. What most people don't think about is that when this happened, there wasn't just 33 victims. There were several who survived. But there is also all the family members, friends, girlfriends, neighbors, and the list goes on and on about who is affected, and to me, those people are also Gacy's victims. Convicted of 33 brutal sex assaults, 33 homicides, 33 abuse of corpses, 33 cruel and inhumane acts on a victim, and more. But it's a shame he couldn't get convicted of the thousands of more victims for the emotional, mental, and psychological trauma endured because of this case. Again, graphic images starting now. These next pictures show you Gacy's house from start to finish, as it was from the day he was finally arrested, which was December 21st, 1978, until today, August 2024. These next two people I will get into much greater detail in the next video, because they are involved with Gacy and the case, as well as the fact that, although they didn't pass at Gacy's hands, they did pass because of Gacy in general. One from drugs and one from his own hands. This is Michael Rossi and David Cram. They stayed on and off at Gacy's house because they were homeless for a while. They would both do on and off jobs for Gacy when he asked them to and would give them money, drugs or alcohol. Rossi was a runaway from an abusive home, and he was a very nice young man. I had a few different conversations with him, and he even ate dinner at my grandma's a few times. I remember one conversation in particular after this case blew up and the trial was going on, and he was at the courthouse after having already testified he was allowed to be in the courtroom if he wanted. It was also one of the few days I was there, and that was because one of the victims I personally knew was being talked about that day, so I wanted to go. I remember after some of the testimony he got up and ran out the door. I asked my grandma if I could go check on him, and she said as long as I didn't leave the courthouse grounds I could and to come right back. I did catch him outside the building alongside an area, and he was throwing up. With what details I had just listened to, I didn't blame him. But with what details he added, I wanted to throw up as well. I was a couple years younger than him, but I did my best to console him. We had already learned that he was one of the people Gacy paid to dig trenches in the crawl space as well as Cram. But we knew he honestly had no idea why, besides being told there were septic issues, and these areas were needed to try and fix that and get rid of the waste and smell. Plumbing issues. That day in court, He learned that one of the trenches he had built was actually used to bury his best friend, who he had asked Gacy to hire because he really needed to make money, so Gacy did. I don't think he ever realized that, because there were several other areas already dug up, and after learning what Gacy did, he figured they were placed into the older areas that were dug up already. Not the case. Before Gacy had gotten arrested, both Rossi and Cram had left Gacy's house, and they were staying at another co-worker who lived really close to Gacy's because they felt Gacy was losing it from drugs and alcohol, having no idea what was really the reason. When I do the next video, I will explain more about those two young men and what happened to them after all this, as well as what Gacy tried to do to them and how he tried to blame them for it all. To this day, there are still a few victims unidentified that were buried underneath Gacy's home. Dart. Cook County Sheriff's Office. Cook County Medical's Records Office. Cook County Coroner's Office and Illinois State Police are still looking to identify them and are hoping to one day finally put them to rest as they should be. If anyone thinks they could possibly have any information at all, even if it is just a guess, they want to hear from you. 2 guesses have already identified 2 victims. I am also happy to announce that one victim who was identified in 2021 and is still buried with a We Remember marker is finally getting a proper headstone with his proper name, Francis Wayne Alexander. Once they do that, I will put a brief video update for you all to see. As I have already mentioned, I will be doing several more videos. Future videos will cover the victims' stories, the trial in much more detail, Gacy's lies and him trying to push the blame on others, Gacy's prison life and the multiple prisons he was in, his execution, the media coverage, newspaper articles, and his interview with CBS in 1992. I also will be covering another survivor who I did not discuss yet on here. I will let him tell his story. I hope you will continue to follow along as I continue going through all this. Thank you for taking the time to watch and listen. Until the next video, here is a few small glances.
me with anything. Charge me with complicity in 2 of the murders.
Just 2?
That's all I know about.
That's his story, that he didn't kill anyone. Just an accomplice, he says, and that he helped dispose of 2. One of them, Robert Peast, who was 15 years old when he went to the house on Summerdale. Gacy owned a construction company and invited young Peast to apply for a job.
Robert Peast was killed by another individual in my home.
How did he get to your home?
He was transported to the house by another.
How did the other, whoever he was, kill Robert Peast?
I believe he was strangled.
You were there, right?
Not during the crime, but I was there afterwards, and I watched the removal of the body.
And what happened to the body afterwards? Was one that was that
It was taken
body
to
was
the river.
put into the
It was
river?
taken to the river and dumped in the river.
Did you help do that?
Yes, I'm in complicity with that. I've always contended. Don't look at me as an innocent babe of the woods.
Not for a second would I look at John Gacy as a babe in the woods. He may be admitting now only to being an accomplice, but 13 years ago when he was arrested, he confessed to almost everything. You have all the bodies, Gacy said, and there was even a killer map showing where 27 youths were buried. And in fact, he led police to his garage and sprayed orange paint on the concrete to mark the spot precisely where a body was found.
No.
Now, he says, he was simply marking a spot where some new concrete had been poured.
In regards to going out into the garage, yes, I know I went to the house, and yes, I know I walked in the garage, and they asked me where the last section of concrete was poured. Okay. I said, there's the last section where the last section of concrete was poured. Okay. They are the ones that took the orange can of paint and said, here, put a mark there. So I put an X there.
So the paint was not to identify the place of burial?
No, it never was. They asked me where.
But according to authorities who were with Gacy that morning, he made more than just an X on the floor.
He sprayed a stick figure with the orange spray can in the garage. Not just a mark, a stick figure showing the orientation of the body. Right underneath that stick figure, exactly where he drew it, pointed in the direction he drew it, was the body of John Butkovich.
Yep. And then there's the Gacy confession about how he killed his victims. Strangled them with his now infamous rope trick that police say he demonstrated to them with a rosary bead. He says he was simply discussing knots in general. Catch his sense of humor.
Shoelaces, huh? You're in trouble now.
Yeah, right.
Aren't you afraid sitting that close to me? What the hell? Oh, this is too long. You don't need it this long. Okay. I had a rosary, which I carried in my pocket. I've always carried a rosary. It was my communion rosary. They said, well, what kind of a knot do you use? I said, what do you mean knot? When I tie things up? I says, depending on what I'm using it for, I said, the only thing I ever learned was from Boy Scouts is a tourniquet knot. He said, well, show us what that is. So I took, at that time, and again, it's together, but in order to demonstrate it here, I took the rosary and I said, well, here, you put it around. This is hard trying to do this. Why don't you put your hand out? Okay, here. What I told him, I said, here, all you do is you wrap it around, you put one knot in it. And I said, then you put a second knot in it. Okay? Mm-hmm. I said, then you take a stick and stick it in here, and you just turn this. And I says, it causes a tourniquet. I said, that's the only knot I ever learned.
Precisely the kind of knot found on the ropes wrapped around the necks of the victims found under the house on Summerdale. And there was other compelling evidence, including wallets and rings of the victims found in Gacy's home, that leave no doubt whatever he was the killer.
Thank you for watching Gacy, the man behind my nightmare. After having a glimpse into this, would you not agree that with everything I have shown you in here, it is enough to cause anyone to feel the same? With the thought of possible victims hiding under where I spent over 2 decades in and out of, where I laid my head down to sleep countless nights, where me and my friends would run and play in the yard and on the parking lot. We also played in the lower area where the storage/laundry area was, and where he put down fresh concrete for what he said was sewage issues in the middle of the night and was located right beneath my grandma's apartment unit. We played in there if it was raining or if it was too cold to be outside, just like it was a basement in our house. Take that and add it to having been at his home. Having stood above those poor young men's bodies without knowing. Having eaten food made on top of the grill that you find out later had a body buried under it. Having smelled an odor and thinking it was sewage and finding out later it was from the bodies you were standing over, including ones you knew pretty well. All this because of one man. A man we all thought we knew very well. In reality, we had no clue at all, and that is the scariest part of it all. And I am only beginning to get my story out. So once again, welcome to Gacy, the man behind my nightmares.